March 24, 1945, 25,000 feet above Linz, Austria. The sky was burning. Contrails crisscrossed like scars across the heavens as hundreds of aircraft tangled in deadly ballet. Below, columns of black smoke rose from the rail yards of Linz, one of the last arteries feeding Hitler's dying war machine. Above, German Me-262 jet fighters screamed through the clouds, hunting the lumbering American bombers. And flying tight around those bombers like crimson sentinels were the men of the 332nd Fighter Group, better known by the red tails that gleamed on the backs of their P-51 Mustangs. Among them was Captain Roscoe Brown, of the 100th Fighter Squadron, a Tuskegee airman. "Check your 6, we've got jets climbing fast," Brown's wingman called over the radio. Brown craned his neck. Out of the haze came the unmistakable silhouette, swept wings, silver fuselage, a Messerschmitt Me-262, the pride of the Luftwaffe. The world's first jet fighter. Twice as fast as anything the Americans had. "Hold formation," Brown ordered. "They'll have to slow down to shoot." For months, Allied pilots had feared the 262s. They could appear, kill, and vanish before anyone could react. But Brown had studied their patterns. He knew that when they slowed for a firing run, they lost their advantage. That was the moment to strike. As one of the jets roared past the bomber formation, Brown broke formation and dove, pushing the P-51 to its limits. The red-tailed Mustang shuddered, its Merlin engine screaming as he rolled in behind the enemy. "Roscoe, what the hell are you doing?" his wingman shouted. "Taking my shot." The jet banked hard, its twin engines blazing blue flame. But Brown stayed on him, anticipating every move, every desperate climb. He squeezed the trigger. 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns spat fire. Tracers stitched across the sky, and the Me-262 erupted in smoke. "Splash one!" Brown yelled. The Luftwaffe ace, later identified as Unteroffizier Franz Schall, a veteran with more than 100 kills, went down in a spiral of fire, crashing into the Austrian hills below. Another jet dove in, guns flashing. Brown rolled, reversed, and lined up his sights. Again he fired, and again, the impossible happened. The second jet burst apart, a fireball tumbling through the clouds. 2 German jets destroyed in under 4 minutes by pilots Hitler's propaganda had declared inferior. When the formation regrouped, silence filled the radio for a long moment. Then someone laughed in disbelief. Those red tails just bagged the Luftwaffe's best. Back at base in Rumitelli, Italy, the air was electric. The Tuskegee airmen had already earned a reputation for excellence escorting bombers through enemy territory without losing a single one to fighters. But this was different. They hadn't just defended the bombers. They had outflown Hitler's newest superweapons and defeated his top aces in open combat. News traveled fast through the German command chain, and soon, it would reach the Führer himself. March 26, 1945, Feuerhauptquartier Adlerhorst, Germany. The bunker was dimly lit, its walls trembling from the distant rumble of Allied bombs. Hitler sat at the end of a long oak table, his left hand trembling, his right clutching a half-empty cup of coffee. The air was heavy with smoke and paranoia. Across from him stood Colonel Hans Dittmar, a Luftwaffe operations officer. He held a thin report stamped Geheim Reichssach, top secret. "Mein Führer," Dittmar began cautiously, "we have confirmation from the Vienna Air Command. 2 of our Me-262s were lost near Linz during the raid on the 24th. Hitler's eyes narrowed. "Lost? To whom?" "American escort fighters, sir." Hitler slammed his cup down, spilling coffee across the map of Europe. "Impossible. No piston aircraft can touch the Me-262 in the air. You're lying or incompetent." Dittmar swallowed hard. "The reports are verified by ground observation. Both jets were shot down by P-51 Mustangs of the U.S. 332nd Fighter Group." Hitler's expression shifted from rage to disbelief. The red-tailed ones. Yes, Mein Führer. The colored pilots. For a long moment, there was only silence broken by the faint ticking of the bunker's clock. Then Hitler let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Negro pilots, he said slowly, the words like poison on his tongue. Are you telling me that Negroes are destroying my finest weapons? No one dared respond. He stood abruptly, pacing, muttering to himself. The Me-262 was supposed to be invincible. Goering promised me air superiority. My aces were supposed to crush the enemy. He turned sharply. How many kills did those black pilots claim? Dittmar hesitated. Reports suggest, 4 jets destroyed, Mein Führer. 2 confirmed. 2 probable. Hitler's voice dropped to a hiss. 4 jets? From a unit that shouldn't even exist in a white man's army. General Kohler, head of Luftwaffe operations, spoke quietly from the corner. Propaganda is already spreading, my Führer. American broadcasts are boasting that their Negro aviators have defeated our elite. Morale among our pilots is, he trailed off. Collapsed. Hitler barked. Humiliated by savages. Dittmar tried to speak, but Hitler cut him off. Do not ever repeat this outside this room. Do you understand? The German people will not hear that their pure-blooded warriors have been bested by. He stopped himself, teeth clenched, eyes wild. The colonel nodded silently. Jawohl, Mein Führer. But outside that room, the truth was already out. Allied propaganda units had intercepted German radio chatter confirming the loss of Me-262s to the Tuskegee Airmen. Leaflets soon followed, dropped across occupied Europe. The red-tailed angels, they strike fear even in Hitler's aces. The men in the 332nd didn't know it yet, but their victory had reached the highest levels of the Nazi regime and left the Führer enraged, humiliated, and speechless. That day, Hitler ordered an immediate review of Luftwaffe operations in Austria and Italy. Goering promised revenge. But the Luftwaffe was dying, and with it, the myth of Aryan invincibility. Far to the south, on an airfield in Italy, Captain Roscoe Brown sat quietly on the wing of his Mustang, wiping the soot from his goggles. He didn't know that his name had just been spoken in Hitler's bunker. He only knew that the men he flew with, men who had once been told they were unfit to fly, had just made history at 25,000 feet. And the sky would never look the same again. March 28, 1945, Rumetelli Airfield, Italy. The sun had barely risen when the men of the 332nd Fighter Group gathered on the tarmac. Their Mustangs gleaming silver with crimson tails lined the runway like a row of sleeping beasts. Mechanics wiped grease from their hands, while pilots crowded around a map spread across the hood of a jeep. The chatter was subdued, but the energy was electric. Captain Roscoe Brown, still wearing the same flight jacket from the Linz mission, leaned against his Mustang, Bunny. He could still feel the vibration of those last dogfights in his bones, the high-pitched scream of his Merlin engine, the tracer fire slicing through the air, the flash of explosions as 2 German jets disintegrated before his eyes. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., their commanding officer, strode across the field, tall, composed, the kind of leader who spoke softly but carried the weight of history with every word. He stopped beside Brown and handed him a fresh mission report. You know they're talking about you, Roscoe, Davis said. Brown raised an eyebrow. Who's they? Everyone. The brass in Naples, the newspapers back home, even Berlin. Brown chuckled. Berlin? You mean Hitler? Davis gave a faint smile. Word is he's furious. 2 of his top jet pilots gone. And it's driving their propaganda people crazy. The 2 men stood in silence for a moment, the wind tugging at their jackets. Around them, airmen loaded ammunition belts into the Mustang's 6 Browning .50 caliber guns per plane. The metallic sound echoed across the field, sharp and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Finally, Brown spoke. Funny thing, Colonel. When we started, they said we weren't good enough to fly. Said we didn't have the brains or the reflexes. Now Hitler himself knows our names. Davis nodded. You didn't just prove them wrong, Captain. You changed what it means to wear this uniform. At 0900 hours, the Red Tails took off again, another escort mission, another chance to remind the world who owned the skies. The bombers they guarded, B-17s of the 15th Air Force, called them angels on our wings. Over the radio, a bomber pilot's voice came through, thick with static but clear with admiration. Red Tails, you boys sure fly like you've got wings from heaven. High above the Adriatic, the Mustangs formed up perfect V-shapes cutting across the blue. Below them stretched the scarred land of Europe, where the war's final act was unfolding. The Luftwaffe was desperate now. Every remaining fighter, every last ounce of fuel, was being thrown into the sky. But even in its final frenzy, the German Air Force couldn't stop the Red Tails. They had learned to outthink their opponents, to use discipline over instinct, teamwork over ego. The Tuskegee Airmen didn't chase kills, they protected lives. That reputation became their signature. Bomber crews would later say, if you saw Red Tails overhead, you knew you were coming home. When they landed that afternoon, news from Allied intelligence awaited them. German sources had confirmed the kills near Linz and the names of the Luftwaffe pilots who had fallen, veterans of the JG-7 jet squadron, handpicked by Goering himself. Captain Brown and his men had done the impossible. As night fell over Rummel, the squadron gathered in the mess hall. Someone had smuggled in a radio. The BBC broadcast crackled over the static. The German High Command refuses to comment on reports that American Negro pilots have destroyed advanced Luftwaffe jets. Laughter and applause erupted. Someone shouted, they'll believe it when they see it. Colonel Davis raised his cup. They've already seen it. And they'll never forget it. For the first time, the men allowed themselves to smile, not out of arrogance, but quiet pride. The Red Tails had faced the best the Reich could throw at them and won. And somewhere, deep in his bunker, Adolf Hitler sat in silence, staring at a report he couldn't comprehend, one that defied everything his twisted ideology stood for. A report that proved the truth no propaganda could erase. That skill, courage, and brotherhood could rise higher than hate. April 1945, Berlin was burning. The city that once boasted of a 1,000-year Reich now echoed with the distant thunder of Soviet artillery. The grand marble halls of the Reich Chancellery were crumbling under the weight of the war Hitler had promised to win. Yet even as the walls fell, the propaganda machine still sputtered on, desperate, defiant, and blind. In a half-destroyed office deep within the bunker, Luftwaffe reports piled high on a desk, each one more grim than the last. Among them was a thin, creased document stamped Höchst Geheim, top secret. It listed the names of Mi-262 pilots lost in recent operations. Next to two of those names, under cause of loss, someone had scribbled in pencil, shot down by P-51, 332nd Fighter Group. The officer who delivered the report hesitated before handing it over to Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring. His once proud uniform hung loose, his medals dull and tarnished. He read the line twice, then looked up in disbelief. Again, he muttered. The red-tailed devils. Yes, Herr Reichsmarschall. Confirmed by radio intercept. Witnessed by our own flak batteries. Göring's face twisted with humiliation. The Führer must never see this, he snapped, crumpling the page. Do you understand? Never. But Hitler already knew. Word had reached him through captured Allied broadcasts and reports from neutral countries. The story had spread faster than censorship could contain it. Black American pilots had shot down his elite jet aces. To the world outside, it was proof that the myth of Aryan superiority had finally collapsed. To Hitler, it was heresy, a wound to his twisted ideology that even his own generals dared not speak of. Witnesses later recalled the outburst. He raged for nearly an hour, pacing, shouting at Goering and the Luftwaffe commanders who had failed him. First the British, then the Russians, and now Negroes. You've turned my Air Force into a circus. But beneath the fury was something he could not admit: fear. Fear that the very foundation of his beliefs, the idea of racial dominance, had been shattered not by numbers, not by machines, but by the undeniable excellence of men he deemed unworthy of equality. Meanwhile, far from the madness of Berlin, the red tails of the 332nd Fighter Group continued their missions. At Rummel Airfield, Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr. received the latest commendation orders from Allied Command. The 332nd had been officially credited with destroying 3 Me-262 jets and more than a dozen other enemy aircraft during their March and April missions. Davis gathered his men beneath the evening sky, their red-tailed Mustangs gleaming behind them. He spoke simply, his voice steady and proud. "Gentlemen, the world may not always believe what we've done. But history will. And one day, they'll teach our names in the same breath as every man who ever dared the skies." Around him stood men who had started their journey in segregation, denied proper training facilities, mocked by their own countrymen, told they would never fly. Now, they were among the most respected fighter pilots in the entire Allied Air Force. In the days to come, as Germany collapsed and Hitler's empire turned to dust, Allied newspapers carried stories of the Tuskegee Airmen. Photographs showed their smiling faces beside the wreckage of Me-262s, their red-tailed Mustangs parked proudly on captured German airfields. And somewhere in the ruins of Berlin, the dictator who had built his empire on the fantasy of racial supremacy sat in silence, his dreams of invincibility burned away by the courage of men he had refused to see as human. Above the ashes, the truth soared higher than any plane. The Red Tails had not just won battles in the sky, they had destroyed a lie that had ruled the world for 12 years.